The summer air hung heavy over the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek, where neat lawns and white fences lined the curved streets like picture-perfect postcards. For years, it had been the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where barbecues were shared, and the children's laughter carried through the open windows like a song of peace. But all of that began to change the day the new family moved in. Their arrival was subtle. A moving truck one Saturday morning, boxes stacked neatly on the curb, a woman carefully supervising as the movers unloaded furniture. Her name was Amina Johnson, a single mother in her early 30s with warm brown skin, deep eyes that spoke of quiet strength, and a small boy named Malik, barely 8, curious, and endlessly polite. They had come seeking peace, a fresh start after leaving behind the noise and tension of city life. Amina had worked hard for this, saving for years, working double shifts as a nurse, sacrificing sleep and leisure to give Malik a safe, clean neighborhood to grow up in. The house wasn't big, but it was theirs. And to her, that meant everything. But Willow Creek wasn't as welcoming as she had hoped. The first few days, the neighbors were polite but distant. A few offered forced smiles, others simply stared as she passed. The first encounter came from the family next door, the Carsons. They were an old Willow Creek family, with their roots deep in the community. George Carson was a contractor who prided himself on keeping the neighborhood the way it's always been. And his wife, Linda, was the self-proclaimed head of the neighborhood association. Their son, Tommy, was around Malik's age, blonde, loud, and spoiled. From the very beginning, Amina could feel the coldness in Linda's tone, the clipped greetings, the way her eyes darted from Amina's curly hair to her modest clothes, the way she said, "Oh, you're the new owner," as if the very idea was somehow surprising. Amina brushed it off, choosing kindness over confrontation. She encouraged Malik to say hello, to wave at the neighbors, to be polite no matter what. Malik tried. He always did. But the real test came a week later, when the children of the neighborhood gathered in the cul-de-sac for their usual Saturday games. Malik, clutching his small soccer ball, ran up with shy excitement, asking if he could join. The kids hesitated, glancing toward Linda Carson, who sat on her porch sipping iced tea and watching like a hawk. When Tommy looked to his mother for approval, she simply shook her head, and in that moment Malik's hopeful smile fell away. Linda rose from her chair, striding toward Amina with an expression of forced courtesy. She said it was nothing personal, but that she didn't feel comfortable having Malik play with the other children yet. She used words like different upbringing and safety, carefully coded but cutting all the same. Amina stood frozen, her face burning as the other neighbors watched from their lawns, pretending not to listen. Malik looked up at her, confused, his small hands tightening around his soccer ball. She knelt, whispered something reassuring, and led him back home. That night, Amina lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the stillness. She had expected some challenges, perhaps a few awkward moments, but not this. Not blatant exclusion disguised as concern. For the first time since moving in, she questioned whether she had made the right choice, whether she could protect her son from the kind of quiet cruelty that smiles to your face but shuts every door behind your back. Days passed and the whispers grew. Linda began spreading rumors that Amina was from the projects, that she didn't fit the neighborhood's standards. Some of the parents subtly discouraged their kids from playing near Malik, saying he was little rough or not from around here. Malik, once full of energy, began spending his afternoons indoors. His laughter faded. Amina caught him staring out the window at the other children, his soccer ball resting untouched in the corner. It broke her heart, but she held her head high, greeting every neighbor with grace, refusing to stoop to their level. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. A loud commotion broke out next door, shouting, crying, the sound of something breaking. Amina looked through her window to see police lights flashing outside the Carson home. Officers stood by the porch as Linda clutched her chest, crying uncontrollably. George Carson was nowhere to be seen. The next morning, whispers rippled through the neighborhood like wildfire. George had been arrested. Fraud, embezzlement, falsifying construction permits. The details were messy, scandalous, and shocking. For years, he had been using the neighborhood association's funds for personal gain. Linda's perfect reputation crumbled overnight. People who had once praised her now avoided her. The once pristine Carson house became quiet, curtains drawn tight. Amina felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only pity. But then, just a few days later, something happened that she could never have predicted. On a rainy afternoon, she was rushing home from work when she heard a knock on her door. Standing there, soaked and trembling, was Tommy, Linda's son. His eyes were red, his voice barely steady as he asked if Malik could come out to play. Amina hesitated. Her first instinct was to refuse, to remember the humiliation, the cruel exclusion, the whispered gossip. But something in the boy's face stopped her. There was pain there and fear, the kind only a child could carry after watching his world fall apart. She invited him inside, offered him a towel, and called for Malik. For the first time, the two boys played together, laughter echoing through the living room, the sound of innocence untarnished by the bitterness of adults. But outside, through the rain-streaked window, Amina saw Linda standing across the street, watching, her expression unreadable, a mix of pride and desperation. Amina didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning of a storm that would soon unravel every hidden truth buried beneath Willow Creek's polished surface. Because sometimes, prejudice is just the first layer of a much darker story waiting to be exposed. The following week brought an uneasy calm to Willow Creek. The rain had passed, but the neighborhood felt changed, quieter, more watchful. The scandal surrounding George Carson's arrest still lingered like a shadow, whispered about in grocery aisles and at mailboxes. But for Amina, it wasn't the gossip that lingered. It was the memory of that day, of Tommy's trembling voice asking to play, and of Linda's haunting stare from across the street. Something had shifted between them. For the first time, Amina found herself thinking about Linda not as the neighbor who had humiliated her, but as a mother watching her own world crumble. She knew that kind of fear, the desperation of trying to protect your child from pain you can't control. Still, the memory of the rejection stung deeply. The nights of Malik crying silently into his pillow, asking why no one wanted to play with him, still weighed heavy on Amina's heart. Forgiveness, she thought, might take time, if it ever came at all. But life moved forward. As it always did, Amina continued her long shifts at the hospital, where she worked tirelessly in the trauma unit. She had a reputation there, kind, dependable, calm under pressure. Her coworkers admired her dedication, though few knew just how hard she had fought to get there. Every degree, every certification, every extra shift, all earned through sacrifice and sheer will. And at home, something unexpected began to bloom. Malik and Tommy grew inseparable. They played soccer in the yard, built forts in the living room, and shared snacks and stories like brothers. Their laughter filled the once quiet Johnson home with warmth again, and for that, Amina was quietly grateful. But the rest of Willow Creek didn't share her peace. Some neighbors whispered disapproval at the sight of Tommy spending so much time there. "It's not good for him," one mother murmured during a morning jog. "He's been through enough without mixing with them." The old prejudice hadn't vanished, it had merely gone quiet, waiting for another spark. And that spark came one afternoon when Amina found a letter taped to her mailbox. Unsigned, written in cold, careful words. It accused her of taking advantage of a broken family, of allowing her son to meddle in other people's troubles. It said she didn't belong in Willow Creek and should remember her place. Amina stood frozen, the paper trembling in her hand. The edges blurred as tears filled her eyes, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She had tried so hard to fit in, to show grace, to rise above the whispers. Yet no matter what she did, some people still saw her as an outsider. That night she tore the letter into pieces and threw it away. But inside, a quiet fire began to burn. If they wanted her gone, they would have to do far more than leave hateful words. She had survived worse. Poverty, long nights in unsafe neighborhoods, endless judgment from people who thought she would never amount to anything. She wasn't about to let a few cruel neighbors define her again. Meanwhile, Linda Carson had vanished from public life. She no longer attended neighborhood meetings or hosted gatherings. The once perfectly manicured lawn grew unkempt, and the Carson home, that had once been a symbol of prestige, now stood as a reminder of how quickly appearances could crumble. Rumor had it she was struggling to keep up with bills, that the court had frozen her accounts. But no one knew for sure, because no one cared enough to ask. Except Amina. One evening, she noticed Linda outside, struggling to unload groceries from her car. Her hands trembled, her face pale. It was a sight that stirred something unexpected in Amina, compassion. Without thinking, She stepped out to help. Linda tried to refuse at first, but when her hands gave out and a bag tore, Amina simply caught it and carried it inside. The air between them was thick, not just with awkwardness, but with years of unspoken words. Linda's pride was gone, replaced by something fragile and hollow. For the first time, she looked at Amina not as an intruder, but as another woman standing in the ruins of her life. In the following days, Linda grew quieter, almost reclusive. But Tommy continued to visit Malik daily, and through the boys' laughter, a fragile bridge began to rebuild between the two mothers. Then, one afternoon, that fragile piece shattered. The boys were playing by the lake that bordered the neighborhood, a place they loved but had been warned to stay away from during the rainy season. The ground was soft and unstable, the water higher than usual. Amina was just returning from work when she got the call. Panic, shouting, neighbors running toward the water. By the time she reached the lake, chaos had erupted. A small crowd had gathered, pointing and crying. Malik stood at the edge, soaked in screaming. Tommy was gone. The muddy slope had collapsed beneath him. He had slipped into the rushing water and disappeared. Amina didn't think. She ran. Without hesitation, she dove into the cold, murky depths, her heart pounding, her instincts taking over. The current pulled at her clothes, but she pushed forward, searching, gasping, fighting the waves. Seconds stretched into eternity, and then she saw him. A flash of pale skin beneath the surface, motionless. She grabbed his arm, pulling him upward with all her strength, kicking, thrashing, until finally breaking the surface. The crowd gasped as she dragged Tommy to shore, collapsing beside him, breathless but determined. She started chest compressions, counting under her breath, refusing to stop. Her training kicked in, her focus absolute. And then, a cough, a gasp. Tommy's chest rose again. He was alive. Amina sat back trembling, tears mixing with the rain. The crowd was silent. No one spoke, no one moved. Linda, arriving moments later, fell to her knees beside her son, sobbing uncontrollably. As the ambulance arrived, Linda looked up at Amina through tear-streaked eyes, and for the first time since they met, there was no judgment, no superiority, only gratitude. But not everyone saw it that way. In the coming days, as word spread, some neighbors twisted the story, whispering that Amina had been careless, that she let the boys go there unsupervised. The same people who once praised her composure now looked for someone to blame. And though Tommy was safe, the damage was done. Amina could feel the old prejudice creeping back, thicker than before. But what none of them knew, what no one could have guessed, was that this single act of courage would soon uncover a truth that would shake Willow Creek to its core. A truth that would finally expose who the real villains were. The morning after the rescue, Willow Creek buzzed with tension. News of the incident at the lake had spread faster than wildfire. Some called Amina a hero. Others whispered that she was reckless. But the loudest voices were not those who praised her. They were the ones who had always looked for reasons to keep her on the outside. By sunrise, the neighborhood group chat was flooded with speculation. Some claimed Amina should never have let Malik play by the water. Others questioned whether those kinds of people were fit to raise children in a community like this. Their words were sharp and familiar, the same polished poison that had greeted her when she first moved in. But Amina didn't respond. She was exhausted emotionally and physically. All she cared about was that Tommy was alive. She had spent most of the night sitting in the hospital waiting room, waiting for news, refusing to leave until she knew he was safe. When the doctor finally emerged, he assured her that Tommy would recover. He had swallowed some water and gone into mild shock, but thanks to Amina's quick actions, he had survived without lasting harm. Amina had simply nodded, relief washing over her like a tide she could barely stand against. As she left the hospital in the early morning light, she saw Linda sitting alone by the window. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither moved. Then Linda rose slowly and walked toward her. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She reached out, her lips trembling, as if words were forming but couldn't quite escape. But Amina didn't need them. Some things were understood without being said. She left quietly, letting Linda have that moment, a mother's gratitude tangled with guilt, confusion, and regret. In the days that followed, Tommy's recovery became the talk of Willow Creek. The same neighbors who had once admired Linda's perfect life now discussed her downfall behind closed doors. The Carsons, once untouchable, had become the center of gossip and pity. But through it all, Linda said nothing publicly. No interviews, no messages, no statements. She simply stayed home, caring for her son. Meanwhile, Malik began to smile again. The trauma of that day faded as Tommy returned to school, and the two boys became closer than ever. They were inseparable, their friendship stronger than the fear that had nearly torn them apart. But as peace seemed to return, the undercurrent of resentment grew darker. Amina began noticing strange things. A tire on her car mysteriously slashed, trash dumped near her yard. Anonymous notes slipped under her door, some crude, some simply hateful. She reported it to the local police, but they shrugged, calling it probably kids playing pranks. At work, even her coworkers began whispering. Someone in the neighborhood had contacted her hospital's HR department, implying that she had neglected children and shown poor judgment. Though the hospital supported her, Amina felt the sting of humiliation. It was clear someone wanted her gone, and deep down she suspected who. Despite Linda's apparent remorse, something about her silence unsettled Amina. The woman who had once ruled the neighborhood with an iron smile now avoided her entirely. No thank you, no apology, not even a wave. Amina told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't need validation. But late at night, she couldn't help but wonder what Linda was hiding. One afternoon, while returning from work, Amina saw a moving van parked outside the Carson house. Her heart skipped. Were they leaving? But when she looked closer, she saw men unloading furniture, not packing it. Curious, she asked a deliveryman who it was for. "Carson family?" he said simply. "New stuff for the home office." Amina frowned. How could Linda afford this? George's accounts had been frozen, and the house was supposedly tied up in legal proceedings. Something didn't add up. That night, while Malik slept, Amina sat by the window, watching the faint light from next door. Through the curtains, she saw figures moving. Linda, pacing, and a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, sharply dressed, his movements tense and deliberate. The way he gestured, the way she nodded, it looked like more than a casual visit. The next morning, Tommy didn't come to play. When Malik asked why, Amina told him Tommy was probably busy. But by the third day, when Tommy still hadn't appeared, Amina began to worry. She walked over to the Carson house and knocked gently. No answer. Through the window, she could see Linda inside, talking on the phone, her voice low, her face pale. As Amina turned to leave, a car pulled up. The same man from before stepped out. Their eyes met briefly, his gaze cold, assessing. Then he walked past her without a word and disappeared inside. That night, Amina's sleep was restless. She dreamed of the lake, of muddy water pulling her down, of faceless people whispering in the dark. When she awoke, heart pounding, she heard a soft knock at the door. It was Tommy. He looked different, thinner, pale, his eyes hollow. He stood there in his pajamas, clutching a small backpack. Rain fell in thin sheets behind him. Amina knelt, confused, and asked what he was doing there. He said nothing, just handed her a folded note. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. "Please keep him safe. Don't trust anyone. I'll come for him soon." It was signed Linda. Amina's heart stopped. She looked out into the rain, half expecting to see Linda running toward her. But there was no one. Only the sound of thunder rolling across the sky. She pulled Tommy inside, locking the door. Her mind raced. What could Linda be running from? What danger was she hinting at? Then, from the corner of her window, Amina saw something that made her blood run cold. The same man from before, standing across the street under an umbrella, watching her house. The same man who had walked into Linda's home days ago. And in that moment, Amina realized the truth. This wasn't just about racism anymore. It wasn't just about gossip, exclusion, or reputation. Something far darker was happening behind closed doors, something that could destroy them all. And Amina was now part of it. The storm outside raged for hours that night, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside Amina's heart. She sat by the window long after midnight, watching the rain streak down the glass, her mind racing with fear and confusion. Tommy slept fitfully on the couch, clutching a blanket Malik had given him. Every sound made Amina flinch. The creak of the house, the rumble of thunder, the occasional car passing by. She couldn't stop replaying Linda's note in her mind, "Please keep him safe. Don't trust anyone. I'll come for him soon." It made no sense. Linda had seemed fragile, but not desperate. And yet, this note, hurried, terrified, felt like the cry of someone cornered, someone running from something more dangerous than gossip or scandal. But who was that man? The way he looked at her, cold, deliberate, told her he wasn't just a friend or business associate. There was power in his stance, control in his tone. And when she thought about the new furniture being delivered, the way Linda suddenly had money again, it all began to connect in dark, uneasy ways. Was Linda in trouble? Or worse, had she made a deal she couldn't escape? As dawn crept across the sky, Amina finally dozed off in a chair near the couch. When she awoke, Malik was sitting beside Tommy, sharing cereal and whispering quietly. For a brief, fragile moment, the sight warmed her heart. Two boys, innocent and unbroken, clinging to their friendship in a world that seemed intent on dividing them. But reality soon intruded. By mid-morning, there was a knock at the door. Sharp, heavy, commanding. Amina froze. Her first thought was the man from the night before. She told the boys to stay quiet and went to the door cautiously. It wasn't him, it was the police. Two officers stood outside, rain still dripping from their hats. They asked if she had seen Linda Carson. Amina hesitated, her pulse racing, before finally admitting that Tommy was inside. The officers exchanged glances. They told her Linda had been reported missing. Her car was found abandoned near the edge of the city. There were no signs of struggle, but her phone was off, and she hadn't been to work in days. Amina's heart sank. She handed them the note, but they only scribbled a few words in their notepads and told her they'd look into it. When she asked about the man she had seen, they brushed it off. Probably someone helping with legal affairs, they said. To them, Linda was a disgraced woman with a messy past, not a missing person worth chasing. But Amina knew better. The look in Linda's eyes that day, the fear in her handwriting, was not the mark of guilt. It was the mark of a woman trying to escape something bigger. That night, as the neighborhood lights flickered out one by one, Amina made a decision. She would protect Tommy no matter what. Days turned into a tense routine. Amina kept the curtains closed, avoided neighbors, and made sure the boys never went outside alone. She told Malik to treat Tommy like a brother, and he did, without question. But strange things continued to happen. Her mail went missing. The locks on her door felt tampered with. And once, while taking out the trash, she saw the same dark car parked across the street, engine running, headlights off. When she looked directly at it, it sped away. Her stomach knotted with dread. Whoever that man was, he hadn't forgotten her. Then, one night, she found something that changed everything. Tommy had been sleeping restlessly, murmuring in his dreams. Amina sat beside him, brushing his hair back gently, when a piece of paper slipped from his backpack and fell to the floor. She picked it up, a photo. It was Linda, standing beside George Carson, but not in front of their old house. The background was different, some kind of office, with unfamiliar men in suits. Behind them was a sign that read Harrington Development Group. Amina frowned. She recognized that name. The company had recently bought land near the lake, the same lake where Tommy had almost drowned. They planned to build luxury condos, despite protests from the community. Many said the project was illegal, that permits had been falsified, and George Carson's construction company had been involved. The realization hit her like a blow. Linda's husband hadn't been the mastermind behind the fraud. He'd been a pawn. Someone higher up had been pulling the strings all along. Someone powerful enough to silence witnesses. And now, perhaps, Linda had become one of those witnesses. Amina's hands trembled. The pieces fit too perfectly. George's arrest, Linda's fear, the sudden money, the man with the car. Harrington Development wasn't just buying land, they were buying silence. The next day, Amina decided she couldn't stay quiet anymore. She gathered the note, the photo, and everything she knew, and drove straight to the police station. But when she arrived, she found the same dismissive officers from before. They listened half-heartedly, took her papers, and said they'd add it to the file. She left frustrated, powerless, until she noticed a woman in plain clothes watching her from the hallway. The woman approached her quietly, flashing a badge. She introduced herself as Detective Ruiz, part of an internal investigation unit. She'd been following the Harrington case for months and believed Amina's story. For the first time, Amina felt hope. Detective Ruiz promised to look into Linda's disappearance personally. She urged Amina to keep Tommy safe, and not to tell anyone what she'd found. But safety, as Amina soon learned, was no longer an option. That night, as she tucked the boys into bed, she heard movement outside, soft footsteps on the porch. Then, a click, the sound of her front door handle being tested. Her heart froze. She reached for her phone, ready to call 911. But before she could, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. Through the window, she saw headlights, That same dark car idling by the curb. And just as she pulled the boys close, the unmistakable sound of breaking glass shattered the silence. Someone was inside. The moment the glass shattered, time seemed to stop. The sound cut through the dark like a scream, sharp, final, terrifying. Amina's breath caught in her throat as adrenaline surged through her veins. Her body moved before her mind could think. She grabbed the boys, whispering for silence, and guided them toward the small closet beneath the stairs. The power was still out, the house bathed in shadows broken only by the faint glow of headlights outside. Every sound became amplified. The pounding of her heart, the creak of the floorboards, the distant roll of thunder. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard the soft crunch of footsteps. Someone was inside, moving carefully, deliberately. Amina pressed a hand over Malik's mouth as he whimpered, pulling Tommy close. The boys trembled, their small bodies pressed against her. She could feel Tommy's heart racing beneath her palm. Then came a voice, low, muffled male. It was impossible to make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, confident, predatory. The sound moved closer, then paused near the living room. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, scanning the walls, the furniture, the floor. Amina held her breath, praying he wouldn't see the faint light leaking from the closet door's edges. Then, footsteps again, retreating this time. Toward the back of the house, Amina used that moment to act. She pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking, and dialed 911. But before she could speak, a sudden crack echoed. The sound of the back door being forced open wider. The intruder had found another way in. She hung up immediately, realizing the call might alert him. Instead, she opened the small emergency window beside the closet. It was barely big enough for the boys, but it would have to do. She whispered to Malik to climb out first, then helped Tommy through. The rain outside was heavy, turning the ground to mud. "Run to the Johnsons next door," she mouthed to them. "Don't look back." They nodded, terrified but obedient. Malik climbed out silently, helping Tommy after him. Amina waited until she saw them disappear into the darkness, then closed the window quietly. Now alone, she crept from the closet, her pulse hammering in her ears. She moved through the house like a shadow, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The intruder's flashlight flickered again, this time from the hallway. He was moving toward her bedroom. She spotted a silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered, the same man she'd seen outside before. The one who had met with Linda. His presence filled the space with menace, his every movement slow, deliberate. Amina slipped behind the couch, crouching low, searching for something, anything, to defend herself with. Her eyes landed on the heavy metal candle holder on the shelf. She gripped it tightly, her hands slick with sweat. The man stepped closer, his voice now clear. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," he muttered, scanning the room. "You made things difficult." Her chest tightened. He wasn't just here for Linda. He was here for Tommy. Amina steadied her breathing. When he turned his back, she rose silently, every muscle tensed. And then, she struck. The blow landed squarely on his shoulder, knocking him off balance. He grunted, turning sharply, and grabbed her wrist with frightening strength. The candle holder clattered to the floor. Amina fought back fiercely, kicking, clawing, doing anything to break free. But he was stronger. He shoved her against the wall, his hand closing around her throat. "Where's the boy?" he hissed. "You think you can hide him from us?" His words confirmed everything. He was part of it. The corruption, the fraud, the cover-up. Tommy wasn't just a witness, he was a liability. Amina gasped for air, her vision blurring. But just as the world began to fade, a blinding light flooded the room, red and blue flashing through the windows. Sirens. The police had arrived. The man froze, cursing under his breath. He released her and bolted toward the back door. Amina stumbled after him, gasping, clutching the wall for balance. Through the doorway, she saw officers swarming the yard, flashlights cutting through the storm. The man disappeared into the woods behind the house, the sound of barking dogs and shouting officers trailing after him. Amina collapsed to her knees, shaking uncontrollably. The living room was a mess. Glass shards, overturned furniture, muddy footprints. But she didn't care. All she could think of was the boys. Moments later, an officer burst through the door, weapon drawn. He shouted for her to stay still, but when he saw her battered and trembling, his tone softened. Amina managed to speak through her tears. The boys, the man, the note. Within minutes, more officers arrived. Malik and Tommy were found safe at the neighbor's house, soaked but unharmed. As they were reunited, Amina clutched both boys tightly, unable to let go. The relief was overwhelming, but it was mixed with something else: rage. Rage at the corruption that had brought this to her door. Rage at the cowardice of those who had turned a blind eye. In the chaos, Detective Ruiz arrived, her hair plastered to her face from the rain. She took control immediately, ordering her team to track the suspect. When Amina handed her the photo again, the one of Linda and the Harrington group, Ruiz's expression hardened. "This is bigger than we thought," she said quietly. "He's one of them. And if he broke into your home tonight, it means Linda might not have much time." Amina's heart clenched. "You think she's still alive?" Ruiz nodded grimly. "If she left that note, she's running. But they'll find her eventually. Unless we do first." As the officers secured the house, Ruiz urged Amina to pack a bag and leave town for a few days. "They know who you are now," she warned. "And they know what you know?" But Amina shook her head. "I'm not running," she whispered. "Not until I know she's safe." Ruiz met her gaze, and for the first time saw the fire that had carried Amina through years of struggle and injustice. The strength that had carried her through the ridicule, the prejudice, the whispered hate. "Then we'll bring her home," Ruiz said. Outside, the storm began to fade. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the first faint light of dawn broke through the clouds. Amina stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun rise over Willow Creek. For years, this neighborhood had judged her, rejected her, belittled her. But now, she was the one standing strong, not because of their approval, but despite it. She looked down at Malik and Tommy, asleep on the couch inside, safe for now. And she knew the fight wasn't over. Because somewhere out there, Linda Carson was still running, and the truth she carried could bring everything crashing down. The sun rose over Willow Creek like a warning flare, quiet, golden, and deceptive. The storm had washed the streets clean, but the town still carried the weight of the night before. News of the break-in spread quickly, whispered between neighbors who peeked from behind curtains, their curiosity barely masking their guilt. Amina's house, once invisible to them, was now the center of their attention. Police cars still lined the curb, their lights casting slow rotations across damp lawns. Officers moved in and out, collecting evidence. The shattered window was boarded up, a scar of what had happened. But Amina was no longer afraid. She was awake, alert, and burning with purpose. Detective Ruiz had stayed the night at the station chasing leads. She returned at dawn, dark circles under her eyes but a determined spark in her gaze. She brought with her a laptop and a thin folder. When she spread the photos across Amina's table, the truth began to unravel like a thread pulled from a tightly wound knot. The man who broke into her house was identified: Richard Cole, a private security contractor with ties to the Harrington construction group. He wasn't just a hired hand. He was the one who had overseen the labor sites where several accidents had conveniently silenced whistleblowers. Among those accidents was the death of a worker named Miguel Herrera, a man Linda had once helped hire. That was when it all clicked. Linda had stumbled on financial documents that proved Harrington's company had been using immigrant labor off the books, underpaying them, and forging inspection reports. When she confronted them, they'd threatened her. So she ran. The photo Linda left behind had been a warning and a confession. Amina listened in silence, her hands folded tightly on the table. The anger in her chest was cold and steady now. For months, she'd endured stares and whispers from people who thought they were better than her. People who built their comfort on the backs of others they refused to see. And now, those same people were the reason a woman was hiding for her life. Ruiz explained that Linda had reached out through an encrypted email that morning. She'd seen the news about the break-in and knew her time was running out. She'd agreed to meet one person: Amina. The meeting place was the old train station, long abandoned since the factory shut down. It was a fitting place, forgotten, quiet, and full of ghosts. When Amina arrived, the air was heavy with stillness. The platform was slick with rain, the paint on the benches peeling from years of neglect. Birds circled the rusted roof beams above. Then she saw her. Linda, thinner, her face pale but her eyes alert, clutching a worn briefcase. The woman who had once carried herself with arrogance now moved with the haunted caution of someone who had seen the dark side of power. She handed Amina the briefcase. Inside were papers, files, and USB drives filled with evidence: payroll fraud, forged safety certificates, photos of injured workers denied compensation. It was enough to bring the entire Harrington group, and the officials they'd bribed, crashing down. But before Amina could speak, tires screeched in the distance. A black SUV turned sharply into the station lot. Linda froze, fear flickering in her eyes. "Go," she whispered, pushing the briefcase into Amina's arms. "Take it to the police." But Amina didn't move. Something inside her refused to run again. She'd spent years bending, hiding, apologizing for who she was. Not anymore. The SUV door opened, and Richard Cole stepped out, flanked by another man. His clothes were different, but his presence was unmistakable. Cold, brutal, certain. Before he could take another step, Ruiz's car pulled in from the other direction, siren blaring. In seconds, the station erupted into chaos. Officers swarmed from behind crates, shouting orders. Cole tried to flee, but Ruiz tackled him, forcing him to the ground as the other man was restrained. Linda sank to her knees, shaking with relief. Amina stood frozen, the briefcase still clutched in her arms. It was over. But the storm that followed was far greater than anything Willow Creek had seen before. Within weeks, headlines exploded across the state. Construction empire exposed for exploiting immigrant workers. CEO and officials arrested in corruption probe. Local woman helps uncover multimillion-dollar fraud. Harrington and his partners were indicted. Their wealth, their power, their respectability, all stripped away. The men who had sneered at Amina in grocery stores and called her the help now watched her face on every news channel. Linda testified in court, her voice steady but trembling at times. She credited Amina for her courage. The woman who had once been her rival had become her savior. When it was over, Linda left Willow Creek quietly, moving to another state to rebuild her life. She and Amina parted with an understanding, not friendship, not forgiveness, but respect born from shared truth. But the biggest transformation came not in the headlines, but in the small, unspoken shifts within the neighborhood. People began to see Amina differently. Parents who once avoided her now greeted her with forced smiles. Children who had been told not to play with Malik now asked to join his basketball games. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was the beginning of recognition. And then, one day, a letter arrived in Amina's mailbox. It was official, an offer. The Harrington Group had been acquired by a socially conscious company that wanted to rebuild its reputation by giving back to the community. They wanted Amina to oversee the company's new diversity and community development initiative. Her eyes filled with disbelief. The same company that once dismissed women like her now wanted her leadership. The irony wasn't lost on her. Karma never came loudly. It came quietly, with dignity, dressed as opportunity. She accepted the offer. Months later, she stood on a stage at a corporate event in the city, dressed in a crisp suit, her hair shining under the lights. The room was filled with people who once would have ignored her. Executives, politicians, community leaders. She spoke about fairness, empathy, and courage, about the price of silence and the power of standing up for what's right, even when no one stands beside you. In the audience, Malik watched proudly, sitting beside Tommy, who had long since become part of their family. When she stepped off the stage, Ruiz met her with a nod of respect. "You changed more than one life," she said. Amina smiled softly. "I just refused to let hate win." Outside, the night was calm, no storm, no fear, no whispers. Just the sound of the wind moving gently through the trees. Willow Creek had finally learned its lesson, and Amina had found her peace. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from power or revenge. It comes from survival, and from the quiet, unwavering grace of those who refuse to be broken.